Every ending is a beautiful neon requiem, a glowing tribute to the path we've walked and the lessons we've learned. Join us as we close this chapter and prepare for the next big reveal. Hit subscribe now and witness the beauty of a perfect resolution.
I did not cry when my stepfather served me the lawsuit papers. I did not shake. I did not slam the door or throw anything across the room the way part of me wanted to. I simply looked at the document, folded it in half along the crease the process server had made, set it on my kitchen counter next to my coffee mug, and finished my breakfast. That was the moment my stepfather should have been afraid. He just didn't know it yet. Let me tell you how a woman who spent 12 years being invisible inside her own family became the person who made her stepfather go completely silent in a room full of lawyers. My name is Victoria. I am 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant, which means my entire professional life is built around finding the things people try to hide inside numbers. I find the gap between what someone says happened and what the records prove happened. I am very good at my job. My stepfather, a man I will call Gerald, knew what I did for a living. He just never once believed I would do it to him. That was his first mistake. It was also his last. My mother married Gerald when I was 9 years old. My biological father had passed away 2 years earlier, and my mother was lonely in the way that grief makes people lonely, not just missing a person, but missing the shape a person leaves behind in a life. Gerald was charming and steady, and he made her laugh again. I wanted to love him for that. I tried, genuinely, for years. But Gerald had a son from his first marriage. His name is Bryce. Bryce was 11 when our parents married, and from the very first week it was clear to everyone in that house, though no one ever said it out loud, that Gerald saw his family as his son and his new wife, with me as a kind of furniture that had come with the house. Present. Occasionally useful. Not quite belonging to anyone. My grandmother on my mother's side, my mother's mother, a woman named Eleanor, saw it clearly. She used to take me for drives on Sunday afternoons, just the two of us, and she would ask me questions about school and my friends and what I wanted to be when I grew up, and she listened the way adults almost never listen to children, like my answers actually mattered. She told me once when I was about 14 that she had set aside money for my college education specifically because she wanted me to have something that was mine alone, something no one could redirect or reassign or quietly absorb into someone else's plans. She put it in a trust. She was careful about it. She did everything right. She passed away when I was 17. By the time I turned 18 and the trust was scheduled to transfer to me, Gerald had been managing my mother's finances for 3 years. He was the one who answered the phone when the estate attorney called. He was the one who explained to my mother that there were fees, administrative complications, that the transfer would take a little longer than expected. My mother trusted him completely. She always did. The money never came to me. I was told when I finally asked directly at 19 that there had been unexpected estate taxes and legal fees that had consumed most of the fund. Gerald showed me a document. It looked official. I was 19 and I did not yet know how to read the things that documents do not say, only the things they do. I cried in my car for about an hour. Then I applied for student loans and I went to college anyway, and I built a career out of learning exactly how to find what people hide. I want you to understand something about the 12 years between that moment and the moment I am about to describe. I did not spend those years planning revenge. I spent them building a life. I graduated. I got my certifications. I took a job at a firm in Chicago. I moved into my own apartment and learned to cook actual meals and made friends who had nothing to do with Gerald or Bryce or any of it. I called my mother every Sunday. I visited at holidays. I smiled at Gerald across the dinner table, and I was polite, and I let it be something that had happened, not something that was still happening. But 2 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease, and everything that had been dormant woke up. Gerald's response to my mother's diagnosis was not what I would have hoped for in a husband of 22 years. He did not become more attentive. He did not slow down. What he did was move quickly. Within 4 months of the diagnosis, he had my mother sign updated estate documents that restructured the ownership of their shared assets, the house they had lived in for 18 years, 2 investment accounts, a piece of commercial property my mother had inherited from her own parents, into a joint trust that would pass entirely to Gerald upon her death, with a secondary beneficiary of Bryce. My mother told me about it over the phone like it was a minor administrative detail. She said Gerald had explained it was just for simplicity. She said the estate attorney had walked them through everything. She said it made sense. I said that was great, Mom. I asked her how her physical therapy was going. I hung up the phone and I sat very still for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and I started working. What I do professionally is trace money. I follow it backward through transfers and accounts and entity structures, the way a surgeon follows a nerve, carefully, without rushing, paying attention to where it branches and where it dead ends and where it connects to something it should not connect to. I had never done this for my own family because I had made a deliberate choice to keep those two worlds separate. That choice was over. The first thing I found took me about 3 weeks of evenings and weekends. It was the trust my grandmother had established for me. The original documents were part of the probate record, which is public. What I found when I read them carefully, with adult eyes and professional training, was that the administrative fees Gerald had described were not documented anywhere in the estate records. The estate had closed cleanly. The trust had fully funded. The money had transferred. It had transferred to an account in my mother's name that Gerald had sole signatory authority over. He had taken my grandmother's money for my college education and moved it into an account he controlled, and then he had told me it was gone. I kept working. The commercial property my mother had inherited from her parents, the piece that was now folded into Gerald's trust, had a title history I spent one very long Saturday pulling from county records. What I found was a refinancing transaction from 8 years ago in which Gerald had taken out a home equity line of credit against the property and used the funds to invest in a business venture with Bryce. The venture had failed. Gerald had made payments on the line of credit from a joint account he shared with my mother without ever telling her the line existed. My mother's inheritance, her parents' legacy to her, had been used to fund her stepson's failed restaurant without her knowledge. I kept a document. I kept everything in a folder on an encrypted drive, and I organized it the way I organize case files at work, chronologically, sourced, cross-referenced. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my friends. I am a forensic accountant. I know that the moment you tell someone you have evidence, you lose control of what happens next. Then, 7 months ago, Gerald filed a lawsuit against me. The basis of the lawsuit was a loan. Gerald claimed that 12 years ago, when I was 19, the same year I was told my grandmother's trust had evaporated, my mother had lent me $30,000 to pay for college, and that I had signed a promissory note agreeing to repay it with interest, and that I had never repaid it. And that the outstanding balance with accumulated interest was now just over $54,000, and that he was pursuing the claim on behalf of my mother's estate interests under the trust he had just restructured. He included a copy of the promissory note. It had my signature on it. I looked at that signature for a long time. It looked like my signature. It was close. But I have a specific habit when I sign legal documents, a small second loop in the capital V of my first name that I developed in college after a professor told us to build a personal signature feature that would be hard to replicate. The loop was not there. I am a forensic accountant. I know what document fraud looks like. I also know exactly which experts can prove it. I called a document examiner I had worked with on a case 2 years earlier. I sent her the promissory note. She came back to me in 10 days with a written analysis. The signature showed inconsistencies in pen pressure and letter formation consistent with a copied or traced signature, and the paper stock, based on the chemical aging indicators she could assess, was inconsistent with documents produced 12 years ago. The promissory note was forged. Now I want to tell you about the next 5 months, because this is the part people always ask about. Why didn't I go to the police immediately? Why didn't I hire a lawyer and go on the offensive? Because I had learned something from 12 years of watching Gerald operate. He was very good at appearing reasonable. He was very good at framing things. If I walked into a police station with a folder of financial records and a document examiner's preliminary opinion, Gerald would have an explanation for every single piece of it before the week was out. My mother, who trusted him, would be confused and frightened and caught in the middle. And Gerald would find a way to use that. I needed him to be already committed before I showed my hand. I responded to the lawsuit through an attorney. My attorney filed a standard answer, no counterclaims, no aggressive motions, no hint of what I had. We asked for additional time for discovery. Gerald's attorney agreed. Why wouldn't he? He thought he had a forged promissory note and a stepdaughter who had no idea what was about to happen. During the discovery period, I did 3 things. First, I had my document examiner produce a full written report, and I hired a second independent examiner to review her findings. Both reports reached the same conclusion about the signature. Second, I obtained, through a forensic data recovery specialist I contracted personally, working on documents my mother had given me years ago as part of family records she wanted me to keep, a complete transaction history for the account Gerald had used to absorb my grandmother's trust funds. I had the source documents, the wire transfer records, and a clear paper trail showing exactly where the money had gone after it left the estate. Third, I located the original lender records for the home equity line of credit Gerald had taken against my mother's inherited commercial property. The application listed Gerald as the sole borrower. There was no evidence my mother had been informed, advised, or had signed any disclosure as a co-owner of the underlying property. Under the state statute that applied at the time of that transaction, her signature had been required. The loan had been obtained fraudulently. I gave everything to my attorney 2 weeks before the scheduled settlement conference. I watched her read through the folder. She looked up at me when she was done with an expression I recognized from my own work. The expression of someone who has just seen the complete picture and understands what it means. She said, "How do you want to handle this?" I told her. The settlement conference was held at the offices of the mediator Gerald's side had selected. Gerald was there with his attorney. My mother was not there. She was at a physical therapy appointment, which Gerald had scheduled for that morning, which I believe was not a coincidence. Bryce was there, sitting next to his father, in a suit that was slightly too large for him. I wore a gray blazer, and I carried a single portfolio. I had been in rooms like this before, on the professional side of the table, and I knew something that Gerald did not know. The person who speaks first in a negotiation like this is almost never the person who controls it. Gerald's attorney opened. He summarized the claim. He referenced the promissory note. He used the phrase, "long overdue family obligation," twice. Gerald nodded along and looked at me with the expression he had been using my entire life, the one that said I was a minor inconvenience in a story that was really about him. My attorney said we had some documents we wanted to share before responding to the claim. She slid a folder across the table. Gerald's attorney opened it. Gerald leaned over to look. I watched Gerald's face. The first document was the forensic analysis of the promissory note signature. The second document was the transaction history showing my grandmother's trust funds moved into Gerald's controlled account. The third document was the home equity loan application and the statute citation establishing that my mother's signature had been legally required and was absent. The fourth document was a summary memo my attorney had prepared connecting all three instruments to potential charges: wire fraud, elder financial abuse, document fraud, with the relevant statutes listed and the approximate sentencing ranges noted. Gerald's attorney asked for a recess. During the recess, my attorney and I sat in a small conference room, and she brought me a cup of coffee, and we did not say very much. I looked out the window at the street below. I thought about my grandmother taking me for Sunday drives and asking me questions like my answers mattered. I thought about being 19 years old and sitting in a parking lot crying over money I had already lost before I understood what had been done. I was not angry sitting there. That was the thing I had not expected. I'd spent months being angry, alone in my apartment at 11 o'clock at night, reading through documents and understanding more and more clearly the full shape of what Gerald had done. But sitting in that conference room, I felt something closer to calm. The kind of calm that comes when a very long question finally has an answer. Gerald's attorney came back without Gerald. He sat down across from us, and he said that his client was prepared to withdraw the lawsuit with prejudice and to discuss a resolution of the related matters my attorney had raised. My attorney said that was a reasonable starting point. Then she outlined what a full resolution would require: the return of the funds from my grandmother's trust, with interest calculated at the applicable federal rate for the period since the transfer. A full accounting of all transactions involving my mother's inherited commercial property, including restitution for the equity that had been consumed by the fraudulent loan. A revised estate structure that included independent oversight of the trust assets and a defined inheritance provision for me that reflected what my mother had always intended. A signed agreement, acknowledged before a notary, that Gerald would make no further claims against me of any kind, would not contest the revised estate terms, and understood that any future contact intended to intimidate or pressure me would result in the immediate referral of all materials to the relevant authorities. Gerald's attorney went back in. He came back out 40 minutes later. Gerald agreed to every term. I want to tell you what happened in those 40 minutes, because I wasn't in the room and I don't know for certain, but I know Gerald. He had spent 22 years being the person who held information and used it. He had built his entire position in our family on being the one who knew things other people didn't, and he had walked into that conference room that morning genuinely believing he was about to collect $54,000 from a stepdaughter he had never once taken seriously. What he found instead was that the person he had never taken seriously had spent the past 7 months building a case file on him the way she built case files professionally, thoroughly sourced, cross-referenced, airtight. and that she had given him one single opportunity to resolve it privately rather than criminally. He was smart enough to take it. The signed agreements were finalized 3 weeks later. The first transfer arrived in my account on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk at work when I saw the notification come through. I sat with it for a moment, then I went back to the case I had been working on because I had a deadline and because the work doesn't stop. My mother called me that evening. Gerald had told her a version of events in which there had been some administrative errors from years ago that he had corrected, and I had been very patient about it. My mother said she was sorry if things had been confusing. She said she was glad it was sorted out. I said I was glad too, Mom. I asked her how physical therapy was going. She said she was making progress. I filed a separate confidential tip with the State Financial Crimes Unit 3 days after the agreements were signed. I included everything. What happens with it is not mine to control. But the record exists now, and it is complete, and if Gerald ever looks for another family to quietly absorb, someone will find it. Bryce called me once, about 2 months after everything was finalized. He left a voicemail. He said he hadn't known about most of it. He said he wanted me to know that. He said he was sorry. I listened to the voicemail twice, then I saved it, because I save everything. I have not called him back yet. I am still deciding what I think about what he said. That part of the story is not finished. What I know is this. My grandmother left me something. She did it carefully and specifically and with full intention. She wanted me to have something that was mine alone. What Gerald took was money. What he did not count on was what I became in the years I spent without it, the education I built anyway, the skills I developed, the professional instincts I sharpened on hundreds of cases before I ever turned them toward my own. He handed me the tools and then forgot I had them. I did not forget. If you have been treated like furniture in a house that should have been your home, I want you to hear something. The patience you have built in those years is not weakness. The observation you have learned from being overlooked is not nothing. Sometimes the thing someone took from you is exactly what teaches you how to take it back. That's all for today. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, share it with them. I'll see you next time.